Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices is made possible in part by Allstate and the Searle Funds at the Chicago Community Trust.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices. I'm Brandis Friedman and thank you for sharing part of your weekend with us. On the show tonight, some Chicago public schools are facing big budget cuts in the upcoming school year. Hear from community members and the head of CPS. A documentary about a South Chicago parish's heartbreaking losses during the Vietnam War premieres on WTTW this weekend. Cook County Health's new initiative seeks to change healthcare's approach to the diseases that disproportionately affect Chicago's Black and brown communities.
We feel that our culture deserves to be here.
And a shop bringing all the colors of Mexico to Chicago's downtown hopes to stake a permanent claim on the Magnificent Mile. First off tonight, the Chicago Teachers Union and advocacy groups are protesting budget cuts they say their schools are facing. This after Chicago Public Schools released individual school budgets with more than 40% of schools expected to see fewer dollars. District data shows the average increase to schools receiving more funding was about $330,000. The average cut to schools losing funding was over $220,000. 177 schools lost at least $100,000. Now, these cuts come on the heels of deep enrollment declines across the system. Nearly 25,000 students have left CPS since 2020. More than 11,000 of those students are Latino. Joining us now with more are Hal Woods, Chief of Policy at parental education advocacy organization Kids First Chicago, Andrea Ortiz, Director of Organizing at Brighton Park Neighborhood Council, and Pedro Martinez, CEO of the Chicago Public Schools. Welcome all of you and thank you for joining us. Andrea Ortiz, let's start with you, please. Shields Middle School in your neighborhood of Brighton Park, it's budgeted to lose about $212,000 for core instruction and another $175,000 for special education. What has been the response from the community upon hearing this news?
Yeah, a lot of anger, confusion. I think we're coming out of, we're still in a pandemic, thinking about this community that has been hardest hit by this pandemic, community that has seen high level of violence. And what we want to do is set up our schools for success. And that doesn't look like cutting our budgets. And we're hearing it from parents, the LSC members, the principals, that they're having to cut essential bilingual education, teaching positions. We should be investing in essential trauma-informed resources, more bilingual ed, more special education. And these budget cuts are inequitable, they're unsustainable, and Black and Latinx communities are carrying the burden.
Hal Woods, Shields, and the other affected schools, they are in fact losing students. How can CPS balance declining enrollment, but without also trimming the budgets for these schools? Is that even possible?
Well, Chicago Public Schools does use a student-based budgeting approach, which does fund schools based on the numbers of students that enroll. I know one of the major topics that our parents have brought to us at Kids First Chicago, you did have in mid-March, school budgets came out, but then you had about less than a week later, you had a presentation of the Chicago Board of Education indicating that there was about $1.6 billion of unspent, at this point, federal dollars that came to CPS through the recovery funds from the state of, from the federal education funds, that stimulus funds. So that is one option, certainly thinking about how to use those unspent funds to cushion the enrollment declines that many schools across our city are seeing.
Now, Pedro, I think you've said, obviously, the challenge with doing that is that that could potentially set you up down the road for budgetary problems if you use these one-time dollars to fund permanent positions. But you also told Paris Schutz on Chicago Tonight earlier this week that you are slowly shifting away from student-based budgeting. What does that look like? Because your predecessor, Janice Jackson, said that it's something that she believes in. What are your thoughts on student-based budgeting?
Well, let me clarify a few things. So first of all, we are using our ESSER money, and really, I think the conversation really and the question is, what's the best way to use that ESSER money? And we went directly to our principals and said, how do we make sure we set you up for success? And what our principals said very clearly is that we need to have enough teachers to provide all essential services. And this includes reasonable class sizes, making sure that we have intervention teachers that are freed up for children that need help. We're seeing significant achievement gaps right now because of COVID. Making sure that we have more counselors for social and emotional support, making sure that we don't continue to split classrooms. So what has been happening in our district since I was a kid, I was a student here in CPS, when we don't have enough children, we combine the grades. So we might have 10 children in one grade, 10 children in another grade. We force the teacher to try to teach two different grade levels with children that might have varying needs. And the other thing we heard was we need to make sure that we have access to the arts across every single school, because some schools are rich in the arts and some are not. So our budget that we rolled out, we're investing over $300 million, and we're still adding, it's going to probably be closer to $400 to $500 million, so that every single school, without exception, has those resources to accomplish those goals. No school should be cutting back on bilingual programs. No school should be cutting back on any essential services. And you know, if there's something that I wish I could go back and rewind, I wish we could have reached out, for example, to the neighborhood associations, to the different groups to share with you these specific details. The adjustments that are being made to schools, though, are mainly in areas where we just don't have children in the building. So, for example, we might have schools where we provided resources to have 4 preschool groups, 20 children in each classroom. When the children, you know, this school year, they only have 20 children. And so the question for us, and by the way, we don't cut the resources during the year. The real question is, do we keep these resources for the following year? And the problem is that in the same neighborhood, I will have another school that has all the preschool children or has all the diverse learners. And then how do I answer to those parents? Oh, you know, your class sizes are bigger, not because your children have less needs, but this is the way we do budgeting. And by the way, we're going to keep those resources at that school, even if they have less children the following year. And so those are the trade-offs. So what we're proposing to the community is that, you know, let's spend the ESSER dollars over the next few years, give ourselves a runway, and let's make sure that we really address the needs of our children. The commitment that I'll make is that every single school is going to have more funding on a per student basis, and they're going to be able to meet these priorities.
And of course, when you say ESSER, it's a very long acronym that refers to those federal dollars, elementary and secondary school emergency relief dollars. Andrea Ortiz, you've expressed concern, you know, that these CPS cuts could lead to increased neighborhood violence. What do these cuts to schools mean to schools in Brighton Park?
Yeah, it means like a disinvestment in our community hubs that should be fully resources. We're seeing, you mentioned student-based budgeting. Student-based budgeting, we know, is racist and leads to these inequitable distributions of funds to our schools. If you look at the 40% of the schools that are receiving these cuts, it's in predominantly Black and low-income communities, compared to the other schools like Mount Greenwood Elementary or Waters Elementary that's receiving an increase, that it's predominantly white schools. We want to make sure that we're able to provide all the resources to all the schools, and our Black and brown communities deserve the same investment that we're seeing in other communities, especially like I mentioned before, these are the communities that have been carrying the burden from the pandemic, who are always hit by these cuts and are often ignored and the first to receive cuts throughout the district.
Sorry, we're short on time, and I want to get a couple more questions in before we do. And Pedro, obviously, I'll give you the opportunity to respond to that in just a moment. But how could CPS have gone about the budget process differently and going forward? It's not done yet.
I think the timing was jarring. I think having in mid-March hearing about budget cuts, again, as you've alluded to, 40% of schools. In our own analysis, we saw that it was even a little bit higher in terms of the percentage of schools, because if a school wasn't seeing a 3.5% increase, which is the increase in teacher costs, we called that a cut. I think there has not been, frankly, a tremendous amount of engagement with families about those ESSER funds. There was the program that was launched by Dr. Jackson prior to her departure, the Moving Forward Together program, which is about $500 million for social emotional learning. But we haven't really seen a lot of family, parent, student, teacher, principal engagement that our organization has been a part of since those conversations last June. So I would say with $1.6 billion, with 6% of those funds being spent or committed thus far, I would really look to the district to be, I think, one, transparent about the information about where those funds sit, where those funds are committed, to maybe have a website, a dashboard where on this actual information that LSC members can go to, can understand what their local school is receiving. But also to say engagement, where we've had a full year almost of learning We have students with tremendous academic and social emotional needs. And let's talk to our educators, our families, our parents, our students about where their needs are so we can program the rest of those federal funds, because the worst thing that could happen is we have to give a portion of those funds back because they don't get spent by the deadline next summer.
Of course. And Pedro, we've got very little time left, about 30 seconds, if you'd like to respond to those two.
First of all, when our budget is completed, and it's true today, we're spending more on a per student basis than ever before. We're spending more for our Latinx and our Black students more than ever before. And again, for the first time, we have foundational resources to meet the needs of our schools. There is no essential services being cut. And again, the conversation will continue with the community about how do we make sure that we make these resources sustainable? How do we provide them over multiple years? We can always front load them a lot more. The challenge with that then is we create sustainability issues and we create inequities in schools when we allow resources to stay when we don't have children. And that is 100% that is driving any adjustments in budgets.
Okay, no easy answers, and obviously we're not going to figure it all out today, but my thanks to the three of you for joining us for this discussion right now. Pedro Martinez and Hal Woods and Andrea Ortiz, thank you so much.
Thank you.
The brutal toll of war on a generation of young men and their families is the subject of the latest episode of WTTW's documentary series, Chicago Stories. Through first-hand accounts and archive footage, Our Soldiers, Our Lady of Guadalupe examines a community in turmoil as Chicago's first and oldest Mexican-American parish lost 12 young men in the Vietnam War in a 5-year span. Here's a preview.
I was sewing a dress. I was making myself a Chinese dress, and for some reason I kept making the wrong pattern. And I told my husband, Bail, he was putting shelves up in a closet. I said, something's going to happen, honey. And he says, why? I said, for some reason I can't get my dress. He says, and I said, something's going to happen. My mother too. We had gone to church, and she lit a candle and it broke. She said, Mija, something's going to happen. Then after that is when I found out that my brother was killed. And I told Veo, I said, hon, I told you something was going to happen. And my mom, too, says that the candle broke in her hand when we went to church. So after that, the following day, we got the telegram that he was killed in Vietnam. My crazy brother, Joe. It was my G.I. Joe brother.
Producer Edgar Vargas was raised in South Chicago, where Our Lady of Guadalupe stands. He says even 50 years later, the stories of the young men lost to war, as well as those of those men who made it back home, continue to echo today.
What I wasn't ready for is that not many of the men who I contacted, whether they made the documentary or not, had talked about their experience. So that was really interesting that I said, wow, it's been 50 years. You haven't talked about it? And no, because they went right back to work. They went to do what they had to do. The story tells that they weren't accepted right away, right? Back into society. People knew they were soldiers. So sometimes not because of how they dress, but their haircut alone gave them away. At least in the 70s, for sure. So I think my underlying reason, or what I came to see, is if we don't tell this story now, especially during the pandemic, we lost many of them, we're not going to get to tell this story, or at least not by the people who lived it. And I think that's what makes this story great.
And Our Soldiers, Our Lady of Guadalupe premieres this weekend on WTTW and has airings throughout the month of May. You can also watch it online. You can find more at WTTW.com/Chicago Stories. Up next, what a new think tank hopes to accomplish when it comes to the city's widening life expectancy gap. In a new report, the Chicago Department of Public Health finds life expectancy for all Chicagoans dropped by almost 2 years during the first year of the COVID pandemic. CDPH says the drop from 2019 to 2020 was one of the largest on record. Latino residents saw the sharpest drop, a 3-year dip from 79.1 to 75.9 years. There is a 4-year gap between Latino and white Chicagoans' life expectancy, which is 79.8 years. And while COVID did have an impact, it was diabetes, heart disease, cancer, and stroke, illnesses that have disproportionately plagued Black and brown communities that exacted the worst toll. Cook County Health recently unveiled the Change Institute, a think tank they say will bring the urgency and focus of the COVID pandemic response to addressing these other health issues. Joining us now with more is Cook County Health CEO Israel Rocha Jr. Thank you so much for joining us, Israel. So what inspired the Change Institute's creation?
You know, I think that what really inspired us to take action, and that now was our moment to do so, was, what we were able to go through during COVID. We went from having a disease that no one knew anything about to basically treating people with air and water, ventilators and hydration. And then within a year, and while it was a very long and arduous year that we went through, in the terms of medicine, it was lightning speed to go from not having a diagnosis to having a vaccine in hand that was able to help us mitigate the most severe impacts of COVID. That energy, that excitement, that ability that we all came together because we knew that the disease affected us all, we want to keep that going. And the Change Institute represents a movement and a coming together of an idea that we can make things happen, and we want this to continue, and we want to address the illnesses that you just spoke about, the illnesses that lead to that gap in life expectancy.
And you've said that you plan to work, not only to address social determinants of health, but also how they are perceived among healthcare providers. Explain that a little bit more for us.
I think that's so important that you mentioned that. It makes me excited to hear you say that, because absolutely. I think there was a point in our country when people, mainly the healthcare profession, needed to understand what was happening for patients at home. And so we started talking about the different factors that help determine our health. But somehow along the way, that went from understanding to a diagnosis. And people started using social determinants to say that you were social determined to do something. The Change Institute's most important mission is to say that nobody is determined to have a bad outcome. It doesn't matter your race, your ethnicity, what you look like, where you live. Those should not be the factors that determine whether you live or die. We have science and technology to mitigate that, and it's time that we change that. And everybody has an ability to live their best life.
What kind of outcomes or actionable steps do you think the Change Institute could eventually produce, and hopefully we can see them implemented? What's the tangible?
So for us, it really is to make it very tangible. There are quite a bit of things that are happening in healthcare. We have some amazing things that happen. Unfortunately, those amazing interventions are not equally accessible to everyone. And so we want to make them accessible. For example, the number one thing that causes illness and death in Cook County is cardiovascular disorders. We have advanced surgeries that are called TAVRs, ablations, things that can help you live longer, but they're not available to everyone because they're often elective. If you don't have insurance, if you don't have the right insurance, they may not be accessible. We want to change that and make them available to everyone, because those are the differences. That access is helping to, or part of the process of why you have one area that lives longer than another.
And to that point, how will any recommendations that the Change Institute makes, how will those be funded when the time comes?
So we're hoping that today, if you're hearing us today, we want the Change Institute to be a convening of everybody. We need our business partners. We need our nonprofits. We need the community to join us. As we said, the Change Institute is the start of a movement that we all can live our healthiest life, that we can be better, that we can address these challenges that have plagued us for so long, cardiovascular disorder, neurological disorders, oncological disorders, diabetes, that we can make a movement together, but we need their help. We need their funding, we need their research, and we also need their time.
And how do you plan on engaging the communities that you serve going forward?
I think that starts with a partnership. really not talking down to patients, but having a collaboration and a conversation where we're all equals, we're all peers. We bring the information to the table and we help everyone understand what needs to be done so that we're all healthy. It shouldn't be where a medicine is a top-down approach where we're speaking from a dais of your provider. We are one and the same, and that is part of one of the things we want to change. It is a global conversation about how we all can live better because we all want to be better and what we can do to make that happen.
And of course, it's still early days yet for this organization, but what are the next steps now that the Change Institute has been organized?
So the next steps are that we are going to very soon, hopefully in the fall, going to be convening together a summit. We want to bring the best minds and ideas to the table to expand the conversation. We have some projects already that are underway that we'll hopefully be announcing soon and keep things going forward. We want to go from the largest projects to even some of the most simple things that we can do. Like we did recently at our Providence Center. We created a new MRI center so that people could be able to get timely access to imaging studies, all the way to some advanced studies. But the summit should be there to bring us forward. And then we also want to celebrate our idea and our goals.
I'm sure, and we look forward to hearing about some of those projects later on down the road as you're ready to share them. But Cook County Health CEO Israel Rocha Jr., thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The COVID-19 pandemic has been tough on retail everywhere, but it's been especially evident on Chicago's historic Michigan Avenue shopping district. According to an analysis by Cushman and Wakefield, the retail vacancy rate along the Magnificent Mile is 9.3%. That's a 6% increase from 2019. Last year, a local family business saw an opportunity in those empty storefronts. They're offering a different kind of luxury to downtown shoppers. Handcrafted artisan goods direct from Mexico. Producer Erica Gunderson browsed the magnificent Mexican Mile at Colores Mexicanos.
Nestled in Chicago's ritziest shopping district, Colores Mexicanos offers an experience a world away from its retail neighbors.
Everything here has a part for sure of the energy, of the heart and of the soul of the people who made it.
Shoppers stepping inside the Michigan Avenue store are swiftly transported from busy urban streets into a vibrant Mexican street market bursting with handcrafted goods.
Anything that they choose to take home from this store is not just a product. In the great majority of cases, there are numerous generations behind these particular crafts. People have learned their crafts from their grandmothers, their great-grandmothers, and so forth.
Colores Mexicanos got its start 5 years ago in the Belmont-Cragen neighborhood, where two sisters and their family friend began selling Mexican artisan items at neighborhood markets and even in their backyard.
Family trips all around Mexico. We start to understand that each community all across the country have different kind of works. So we start loving every work around and just buying for our family collection. And then we decide that we had a lot. And when people came to our house, they say, oh, this is very beautiful, our friends or family. And we start to sell that things to them.
Co-owners Erika Espinosa Cruz, Letty Espinosa, and Gabriel Neely Streit had built a thriving small business when they learned the city was seeking cultural vendors to set up shop on the Riverwalk. Colores Mexicanos nabbed a coveted spot there last summer, and Espinosa Cruz says the warm response they received inspired them to approach the city with an even more ambitious proposal.
During the pandemic, we realized that a lot of spaces here in Michigan Avenue was closed. So we just asked for one opportunity with the company owners. We sent a proposal again, and they accept us.
With financial support from the city's COVID Recovery Fund and the help of the Magnificent Mile Association, Colores Mexicanos moved into an empty retail space on Michigan Avenue. The Espinosa sisters and Neely Streit transformed the space in just 3 days to open in time for Black Friday.
When people came into the store, they feel very different vibes. They say all the time that they feel happy and taking an experience like they are in another place, very far away from Chicago.
With all this room to spread out, Colores Mexicanos has been able to expand the items that they offer. Everything from jewelry to housewares to Aprons almost too pretty to cook in.
One of the benefits of this space, big stage with this beautiful light and windows, is we can show more about the diversity of our culture.
It was a chance for a really small business to present itself professionally downtown.
Though the pop-up was originally scheduled to end after the holidays, Colores Mexicanos' success led them to extend their stay. Now the owners are hoping they can make their Mag Mile home a forever home.
We would be so happy if this store could stay downtown, because especially for Erika and Leti, who for them this is an opportunity to remain connected to their culture.
One of our wishes now is just continue to show these beautiful things with the world, with our community and other communities. We understand that for Michigan Avenue, we are very different. We are not the usual store that you can find, but that is the point that we are more proud now because our culture deserves to be here.
For Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, this is Erica Gunderson.
As of now, the owners of Colores Mexicanos say they're in the process of negotiating a longer-term contract with the property owner. We'll keep you posted. And that's our show for this weekend. Please be sure to check out our website, WTTW.com/news, for the very latest from WTTW News. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for sharing part of your weekend with us. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that's proud to serve its community through pro bono legal services.